Snow swallows a county road, and somewhere out in all that white, a pair of headlights dies, pull back. A two-lane ribbon with no name, no shoulder, no signal. Pines leaning in like witnesses. A single luxury car sits dead in the drifts. Hazard lights pulsing weak against the storm. Wrong car, wrong road, wrong night. Closer now. Through the fog glass, a woman who owns half a skyline grips a wheel that won't answer. Her breath clouds. Her phone shows no bars. Everything she's ever bought is suddenly worth nothing against the cold. Then, far back the way she came, a second set of lights. Old, low, a battered truck slowing where no one else would stop. Closer, a man steps down into the snow, toolbox in hand, and freezes 1/2 second too long when he sees her face, because he knows it. Because he buried it 11 years ago. And neither of them is ready for what happens when that door opens. There were 3 things Catherine Hill believed about herself by the age of 33. That she did not panic, she did not look back, and that there was no door in the world that would not open if you simply made the offer large enough. By the end of this one night, all 3 would be lying face down in the snow. It started with a number that refused to behave. The voice on the phone belonged to a man she had flown across 2 time zones to charm, and the voice was doing the thing voices do right before they walk away. Going gentle, going slow. The tone people use when they've already decided, and are only narrating it so it sounds like a conversation. The merger was dead. 14 months of it, gone in the time it took him to clear his throat. She did not argue. Arguing is for people who still have leverage, and she could hear, in the soft padding of his sentences, that hers had quietly left the building an hour ago. So she thanked him. Warmly, because a warm thank you is its own weapon, the kind you use when you want a man to lie awake later, wondering if he made a mistake. Then she hung up, and sat very still in the back of the car while the city slid past in long wet smears of light. Her assistant would call it a setback. Her board would call it a learning. Catherine called it what it was, privately, in the only honest room she had left, the inside of her own skull. A loss, a real one, the first in 3 years, and underneath the loss, where she did not like to go, a smaller and far more dangerous thing turned over. A question she'd been outrunning since her last birthday. It had no words yet. Just a pressure. The way weather has a pressure before it breaks. Up front, the driver's eyes found hers in the mirror. A flick, polite, asking the only question a driver is allowed. Not how are you, but where to. She couldn't stand it. The smoothness of him, the smoothness of all of it. The car that made no sound, the seats that held her like an apology. The whole frictionless machine of her life that she had built. On purpose. So that nothing would ever again be allowed to be hard. What she did next, she would not be able to explain to a single person on her board. Catherine's voice came flat and final. Pull over, a blink in the mirror. We're still 40 minutes out, ma'am. And the weather. I heard the weather. Pull over. I'm driving myself. It was insane. She knew it was insane. The snow had started back near the interstate and had been Boulder ever since. And a sane woman does not dismiss a professional driver to take the wheel into a storm on roads she's never personally driven. But sane was the problem. Sane had built her a beautiful sealed box and parked her inside it for 11 years. So she put the man in a rideshare with $300 and an apology she didn't mean. She climbed into the driver's seat, still warm from his back, and she gripped the wheel with both hands like it might teach her something, and drove away from the lights. The road thinned fast. 6 lanes to 4, 4 to 2. The reassuring grammar of the highway. Signs, reflective paint, exits promising gas and waffles and a bed. All of it fell away behind her, until there was just a black ribbon of County 2 lane and the snow coming down in earnest. Fat, fast, silent, she'd meant to think. That had been the whole point, to be alone with the dead deal and find the angle she'd missed, because there was always an angle, and finding it was the one thing she was best at on this earth. Instead, the thinking turned on her. 14 months, said the thinking. And for what? And then, worse, with no merger left to hide behind. And for what? Any of it, the tower with her name lasered into the lobby floor, the art she walked past without seeing, the bed so wide she could lie spread eagle in the center and touch no other human being, which was convenient, since there had not been one in it for longer than she'd admit to a doctor. Stop, she told the windshield. Out loud, stop it. Not tonight, talking to glass now. Marvelous. A titan of industry, alone in a blizzard, scolding her own dashboard, and the car, as if it had been waiting for her to be sufficiently humiliated, chose that exact moment to die. It didn't fight. That was the eerie part. No grinding, no smoke, no warning rattle, just a soft electronic exhale. The dashboard lights swooning dim, then dark. The wheel turning to stone under her hands as the power steering quit, and the heat quit, and the engine simply stopped pretending to be alive. She let it roll, steered the dead weight onto what she hoped was a shoulder and not a ditch, and then sat there in a silence so total it had a texture. Snow on the roof, snow on the glass, snow eating the world one flake at a time. She pressed the start button, nothing. Pressed it again, harder, as if the button could be made to understand who she was. The button understood nothing. The button did not care that she had 9 figures and a corner office. It was, she thought, the first thing in years that had been completely indifferent to her net worth. And there was something almost clarifying in it. The way ice water is clarifying. 1 bar taunting, then no bars, then a ghost of a signal that lived just long enough to drop the call and die. Fine, she was a problem solver. She would solve the problem. She catalogued the situation the way she'd catalog a distressed acquisition. Asset, 1 luxury vehicle, currently a paperweight. Asset, 1 coat, hand-finished, breathtaking, designed by someone who had clearly never once stood still outdoors in February. Liability, everything else. The coat was the joke of it. She'd spent more on it than her mother used to make in a season. And out here it was decoration. A costume for a life that happened entirely between heated rooms. The cold went through it like it wasn't there, found her wrists, her collar, the small of her back. And she understood, for the first time in a long time, the difference between being cold and merely having the temperature lowered around you. She got out. There was no plan in getting out. It was animal. The car had become a coffin, and she needed to not be in the coffin. The wind took her breath sideways. She turned a slow circle in the middle of a road with no name, and there was nothing. Trees on both sides, black and heavy, leaning in like they'd gathered to watch. No house lights, no farmhouse glow. This is how it happens, she thought, with the flat, strange, calm panic sometimes hands you. Not in a boardroom, not in a headline. On a road you took because you decided you needed to feel something. Then, far back the way she'd come, a pair of headlights, and she nearly cried at the sight of them. Low and yellow and bouncing. The lights of something old. Her whole body lurched toward the road before her brain caught up and yanked her back. Because she was a woman, alone, in the dark. And there is a calculation a woman's body runs without asking permission. The calculation every man gets to skip. A car came first. A newer sedan moving too fast for the conditions. She stepped to the edge and lifted a hand, and for half a second its headlights pinned her, made her reel. A woman in a ruined coat with her arm up in the dark. The car did not slow. It swung wide around her in a clean little arc of avoidance, threw a fan of slush across her shins, and shrank to 2 red dots and then to nothing. She laughed once, an ugly, surprised bark of a sound, because she had done exactly that, hadn't she? From the back of a warm car. The clean little arc around someone else's bad night. Not my problem. Keep moving. So this is the view from the road, she thought. Lovely, 5 stars. Would freeze again. The next set of headlights belonged to a truck. Ancient. A red gone brown with rust along the seams, riding low like it carried 100,000 honest miles. It slowed, and then it stopped, a careful distance off, not close, far enough that she had room. Which she noticed, which mattered. A man stepped down into the snow. He didn't hurry toward her. He didn't loom. He stopped well back, hands loose and open at his sides where she could see them. And the deliberateness of it, the practiced, obvious care of a man who knew exactly how not to be a threat to a stranger on a black road, loosened something in her chest by a single notch. His eyes went to the car first, then to her. His chest stayed perfectly still, and the question came out plain, no urgency in it, like he was asking about the weather. She just quit on you? Without warning. 1 second it was fine. Yeah, he crouched at the front of the car, ran the flat of his palm beneath the bumper, gentle, the way you'd touch a horse you didn't want to spook. They never warn you. That's the whole personality of a fuel system. Fine, fine, fine. Then nothing. You can tell that from petting it. A breath that might have been a laugh, swallowed by the wind. I can tell that from the way you said it died. No drama, no sputter. That's electrical. Probably the relay. He looked up at her, and the look held 1 beat too long, then broke. Pop the hood for me, I don't. The latch. Where was the latch? She had owned this car 2 years and never once needed to know, and the not knowing arrived now with a heat in her face that had nothing to do with the cold. He found it without being told. Of course he did. And as he bent over the engine bay with a small flashlight clamped in his teeth, he went quiet. A deep, interior, working quiet. And the moment she recognized that particular silence, something cold and old turned over in her gut. Because she had known a silence exactly like it once. In a life she had bricked up and stopped visiting. His voice came up around the flashlight, garbled, entirely calm. Relay. Fuel pump circuit. Common as a cold on this model, he spat the light into his palm. 5 minutes if I've got the part in the truck. Little longer if I have to improvise. You carry spare parts. For other people's cars, a shrug she felt more than saw. I carry parts for whatever might be on the road between my shop and my kid's dinner table. You'd be amazed what's usually broken, the kid's dinner table. She filed it. She didn't know why she filed it. She filed everything. It was a reflex, but this one went into a different drawer than the rest. He came back from the truck with a small box and a rag and got down on the ground, in the snow. Flat on his back in the gray slush at the edge of a county road, sliding under the front of her car to reach a thing she couldn't see. And she stood over him in her ridiculous coat and watched his hands work in the dark. His hands were shaking. Not a tremor, a real shake. The deep, involuntary kind the cold drives into your fingers when you've been out in it too long without the right gloves, which he did not have, because the right gloves cost money, and money had a dinner table to get to. And he kept working anyway, steadied the shaking with nothing but his own stubbornness, and kept threading the small part into its small home. Slow, exact, unbothered, as if the pain were just more weather to work around. She crouched. She didn't decide to crouch. Her knees simply bent. The wet came through her stockings instantly, and she didn't care. Her voice came out smaller than she meant it. That has to hurt. What does? Your hands. They're shaking. A pause. A click. The small, satisfied sound of a part seating home. They'll warm up, like it was the most boring fact in the world. Like pain was a bill that came due, and you paid it without complaining where anyone could hear. And something in Catherine Hill, who had complained, at length and in writing, about the firmness of a hotel pillow, bent quietly in half. His voice drifted up from under the chassis, conversational, almost amused. So, what's a person in a $40,000 coat doing, driving herself into a whiteout on a road with no lights? How do you know what the coat cost? I don't. I rounded down to be polite. A laugh got out of her before she could stop it. The real kind. The kind she didn't do in meetings because it gave too much away. I sent my driver home. On a night like this, a scrape, a click. Why, I wanted to feel my hands on something. The work paused, just for a second, then resumed. His voice dropped, almost to himself. Yeah, I know that one. She wanted to ask what he meant. She didn't. There was a code being kept here, some careful distance he was holding on purpose, and she had the strangest sense that if she pushed it, the whole fragile thing would come apart in her hands. Most people, he went on, they get stranded out here. They lock the doors and wait. Smart, even. Stranger pulls over at night. You don't get out. I got out. You got out. A grunt, the effort of tightening something. People drive this road to put distance between themselves and whatever's chasing them. It's the long way to everywhere. Nobody takes it by accident. The last bolt, snug, and then the road turns around and strands them with the exact thing they were running from. Every time. It's almost funny she had no answer, which, for her, was an event roughly as rare as a comet. The engine turned over. The sound came muffled through a foot of falling snow, soft like applause from a room down the hall, and the dashboard of her dead car bloomed back to life behind him. He slid out, stood, knocked the slush off his back with 2 flat smacks of his palm, and looked at the car the way a doctor looks at a patient he's only patched, not cured. That'll get you home. Don't trust it past that. The whole relay harness is tired. This is a splint, not a fix. Get it on a lift inside the week, a beat, 50. She almost laughed again. A different laugh, the one that meant a number was so wrong it was offensive. She carried cash. Always had. A habit left over from years she didn't discuss. From a girlhood where cash was the only money that was real. She counted off $400 and held it out into the snowy dark between them. He looked at the bills, then at her face. He did not reach for them. She pushed the money an inch closer. It's $400. Take it. You were lying in the snow. It's a $40 job and I rounded up for the house call. His jaw set. Mild, immovable, a stubbornness with no aggression in it at all, which was somehow harder to argue with than anger. 50's right, you don't understand. I want you to have it. I understand fine, softer, which landed worse than loud. I just don't need the rest, and there it was. The sentence that went in deeper than the shaking hands, deeper than the dinner table, deeper than anything had reached in years. Because Catherine Hill had spent more than a decade in rooms full of people who needed the rest. Where the rest was the entire game. Where she had learned there was no no in the world that couldn't be turned to yes, if you were just willing to keep raising the number until the other person's principles got tired. Here was a man whose principles did not get tired. You can buy almost anyone, she thought. The whole trick is finding their number, and every so often, just often enough to keep you humble, You meet a person who doesn't have one, and all your money turns into what it always secretly was. A pile of paper you can't get warm by. She gave him 50. He folded it once, square, and slid it into his jacket like it was exactly enough, because to him it was. He picked up his box. He turned for the truck, and the bell that had been ringing faintly in the bricked-up room rang again. Louder now, almost a shape, almost a name. She opened her mouth to say something safe. Thank you. Drive careful. The nothing you say to a stranger. But the cold had peeled all her safe words off her like old paint, and what fell out instead was the truest thing she had said aloud to another human being in 11 years. I wish you were mine. He went still, one hand on the door of the truck, his back to her. He didn't turn around. For one stretched second, there was only the hiss of snow and the idle of 2 engines, and the spectacle of a woman who negotiated contracts for a living, standing on a dead road, handing her whole unguarded heart to a man she'd known for 15 minutes. Then, low, nearly lost to the wind, almost too quiet to be sure of. I wish that too. He got in. The truck pulled out. Its stall went to 2 red coals, then to nothing, swallowed whole by the white. She took a step after it, then another. 2 steps in heels not built for snow, chasing a stranger's vanishing taillights like a fool in a movie she'd have mocked. And then she stopped. Because chase him and do what? Demand his number. Explain that 4 accidental words had dislodged something structural in her. Something she'd had bolted down so long she'd forgotten it could move. She had no plan. She, the woman who walked into every room with 3. She drove home with the heater roaring and his voice running on a loop she couldn't switch off. A stranger. A coincidence. A trick of adrenaline and cold and a bad night. That was all it was. That was all it could be, except her own eyes kept finding her in the mirror. And the woman in the mirror wasn't buying a word of it. And the woman in the mirror was, unfortunately, the one who ran the whole operation. She did not sleep, and by the middle of that week she would do a thing she had never once done in her life. Pay someone to find a stranger she had no business looking for. By morning she had put herself back together. That was a thing she was good at, pressed, lacquered. Edges sharp enough to draw blood. She went to the tower, she ran the meeting. She killed an idea that deserved killing and resurrected one that didn't, and was, by every external measure, herself again. But the thing about a crack is that it does its work quietly, on the inside, where the polish can't reach. Thursday she sat at the head of the long table while a man half her age walked the room, through a deck she'd already read twice, and she lost the thread, not for long. 8 seconds, 10, but she had never in her life lost the thread. Not in a deposition, not in a hostile room. Not the morning she'd buried a parent and gone straight to a closing, because the closing wouldn't wait 8 seconds. She surfaced to find 7 faces turned to her, waiting on a verdict she hadn't heard the question for. Run the last slide again, smooth as ever. The room obeyed. No one knew, except her. And the not knowing of 7 other people did nothing at all to quiet the one person in the building who did. Because she'd been somewhere else for those 8 seconds. She'd been crouched on a road, watching a pair of hands shake and refuse to quit. And a woman who can disappear from her own boardroom, for the memory of a stranger's hands, is a woman with a problem no quarterly deck is going to solve. The award came 2 nights later. Because there was always an award. This one was crystal, heavy as a brick, handed to her in a hotel ballroom by some coalition of some chamber of something. A room full of people in good wool rising to their feet for a version of her that lived mostly in press releases. She wore the dress that did the thing dresses are supposed to do. She said the lines that do the thing lines are supposed to do. She let a man with a politician's teeth pin a small gold token to her lapel, and she gave the room the smile that had closed deals on 4 continents. And from up on the lit dais, looking out at all that approval, she felt the strangest possible thing. Nothing, not the old clean rush of winning. Not even the mean little pleasure of being the sharpest blade in a drawer full of money. Just a wide gray flatness, the static of a screen left on in an empty house. She had wanted this once so badly it had eaten her sleep for years. And now it sat against her sternum, weighing exactly what crystal weighs, which is to say almost nothing, which turned out to be the entire grim joke of it. She gave the speech. Bet on yourself. Outwork the doubt. Refuse the word no. The room ate it like cake. The ovation rolled up at her in a warm, crashing wave, the exact wave she used to live inside. And in the middle of all that clapping, with 200 important people standing on her behalf, she found herself thinking about a man flat on his back in freezing slush who would not take $400. None of these people would have stopped for me, she thought, looking out at the shining faces, on that road, in that storm. Not one. And then, lower, where it actually hurt. And a long time ago, in a life no tower in it, neither would I. Afterward, at a bar she didn't want, a young man in a server's vest came to clear her untouched plate. His hands caught her eye and held it. Knuckles split and raw and red, the hands of someone who spent too many hours in cold water for too little. She stared until he noticed and shifted his weight. "Get you anything else, ma'am?" "Your hands." She heard how it sounded and tried to soften it, too late. "Sorry. They look like they hurt." He glanced down, surprised. Like nobody had looked at his hands in about a year. Dish stations cold and the gloves rip. An easy grin, no self-pity in it at all. The same flat acceptance she'd seen on a road 2 nights before. You get numb to it. "Congrats on the award, by the way." And he was gone, off to ferry other people's leavings on his cracked red hands. And she sat there cradling a block of crystal engraved with the news that she was the finest in her field, and felt, with great specificity, like she might be sick on shoes that cost more than his month. She left before dessert. She had a whole grammar for leaving. The murmured excuse, the hand on the arm, the exit that reads as important instead of rude. It occurred to her, sliding into the car, that she might be the most accomplished leaver she had ever met. And that this was not, on reflection, a thing to put on a plaque. The crystal rode the passenger seat, where a frozen stranger had once sat for $50. It slid off on the first hard turn and cracked against the floor mat with an expensive little sound, and she heard it go and did not slow down and did not reach to save it. By Wednesday she had broken. Brenda. Her assistant appeared in the doorway, with the silent completeness of long practice. Tablet ready. Face arranged into the careful neutral she wore when the boss's voice had gone somewhere she didn't recognize. 6 years of service had made Brenda Wright a fluent reader of weather most people couldn't even feel. "I need you to find a person." Quietly, a measured pause. Define quietly, quietly like it never happened. "If I lose my nerve," Brenda's pen did not so much as twitch. "Name? I don't have a name, I have a place. A repair shop somewhere past the county line. A mechanic. He fixed my car Monday night." Catherine heard exactly how it sounded coming out of her mouth, and pressed on through it. "I want to know who he is." To her enormous credit, Brenda did not react. Brenda had built a career on not reacting. And if he turns out to be nobody, then he's nobody and this conversation evaporates. But Brenda lingered a half-second longer than the job required, and that half-second was its own small speech. "You don't send me after people," she observed, carefully, laying each word down like she was setting a table she might have to clear in a hurry. "You send me after angles, pressure points, the number a man owes, and the people he owes it to. In 6 years you have never once asked me to find a person just to know them. I'm aware. That's all I'll say about it." For now a beat, and then the honesty was leaking out of Catherine again, this week, through a seam she couldn't find and stitch. "If it's ugly, I want it ugly. Don't soften it for me. Don't handle me." Brenda made a single note. "I would never handle you." A kind lie, in the gentlest possible way. And she went off to put a name to a man neither of them yet had one for. He turned out to be the opposite of nobody. Brenda came back inside 2 days with a folder so thin it felt like an insult. And Catherine opened it at her glass desk 40 floors above a gray river. And the bottom dropped clean out of the world. His name sat at the top of the page in a plain serif font, as ordinary as a grocery list. Thomas Rodriguez. Beneath it, the skeleton of a life. Age 34. Certified mechanic, 6 steady years at a shop out where the city gave up and the strip malls began. The paper trail of a man who pays what he owes, troubles no one, and asks the world for nothing it isn't already handing out. But before the shop, the record went strange. The Brandt Institute. Engineering, the hard kind. A full scholarship, the kind they hand to maybe 2 kids a year. Dean's List 2 years running, the name climbing the rankings like it had somewhere to be, and then, mid-stride, gone. Withdrawn in the 2nd year. No degree. No notation in any column that explained why a young man with the whole runway in front of him had simply pulled up and walked off it, after the withdrawal. For the better part of 2 years, nothing. A clean blank where a person should be. Then slowly, by pieces, a man named Thomas Rodriguez reassembled himself out of the dark. A lease, a renewed license, and 3 dependents. Emily, age 9. Eric, age 7. Anna, age 5, at the bottom, in Brenda's small flat hand. The line she added when she found something that mattered and refused, on principle, to have an opinion about it. No blood tie of any kind on file. Legal guardianship awarded roughly 4 years prior. Catherine read it once. Read it again. Read the 3 small names. Read the school. Read the name at the top a 3rd time. And the air went out of her the way it does when a room you sealed up years ago gets kicked open from the inside. Because the name was not a stranger to her. Neither was the school. She had been in the room when that scholarship letter came. She had been 22. He had been 23. She had loved him so hard it had frightened her into setting fire to the whole thing herself, just to be the one holding the match. The man on the ground in the snow, the shaking hands, the $50. The 4 words pitched into the wind like they'd cost him something to let go of Thomas, her Thomas. She set the folder down with the slow care you'd give to live ordnance, and sat in her enormous cold office, with the city laid out below her like inventory she'd taken and never enjoyed. And for the first time in more years than she could count, Catherine Hill had no idea, none at all, what she was supposed to do next. 2 versions of her fought it out across the desk. The old one made an excellent case. The old one had spreadsheets. The old one pointed out, with perfect reason, that nothing good waited at the end of that road, that there was a quarterly call in 11 hours. That feeling was the most expensive thing a person could acquire, and she had not clawed her way up from cash only to start overpaying for it now. The newer one didn't bother arguing. It just laid a crayon drawing of a yellow house on the desk between them and awaited. The memory came at 2 in the morning, uninvited, the way the worst and best ones always do, in a kitchen worth more than the entire street he lived on now. She let herself remember the apartment, the radiator that knocked all night like it owed somebody money and was stalling, the specific way he used to explain things, an engine, a fuse box, the reason the 3rd stair groaned and the 4th didn't, with a patience that never once made her feel stupid for not already knowing. He talked to her like her not knowing was the interesting part. Nobody had done that before him. Nobody had done it since. She let herself remember the night the letter came. She kept it in the same locked drawer as everything else still sharp enough to cut. He'd read it 3 times in the doorway, lips moving, and he hadn't whooped or punched the air. That was never him. He'd just gone very still, and then lifted his face to her with his whole expression wide open and undefended. A look she would not see on him again until she was 33, and crouched on a frozen road. The words had come out of him barely above a whisper, like saying them too loud might scare the thing back into hiding. Full ride. They gave me the full ride. She'd thrown herself at him, and he'd caught her clean off the floor, and spun her in a kitchen the size of a closet. There'd been no champagne because there was never any money, so they'd toasted with the gas station coffee he brewed 2 strong, 2 mugs with 2 different chips out of the rim. And out of him had come the line she would haul around for 11 years without ever once admitting she was still hauling it. We don't need much, Cat. I mean it. We just can't ever let go of the part that's us. And she had nodded into his neck and meant it with everything a 22-year-old has, which is everything. And then a firm downtown had offered her a junior chair, the first stone of the whole towering thing. And she had let go of the part that was them so cleanly, so surgically, so completely, that a decade later she could stand in a kitchen worth more than his block and very nearly persuade herself the spinning had never happened. He used to leave her notes. Not love notes. Better than love notes. The radiator's loud, but it won't quit on you. I checked the valve. Don't trust the front left burner. It only pretends to be off. Fix the wobble in your chair. It's always the back leg. Write that down for life. Small bright flares of attention from a man who saw the machinery of the world and assumed, every time, that she'd want to see it too. She had told herself, for years, that she'd thrown every one of them out, that she traveled light, that she was simply not built to keep things. It was a story she would discover, much later, that she had been telling very badly. What was true was plainer. She had packed a bag, she had caught a train, and then she had managed the distance by the simple act of slowly, completely ceasing to exist for him, the way she ceased to exist for anything that asked her to stay soft past the point where softness was useful. She had assured herself he'd be fine. He was brilliant. The brilliant ones always land upright. The brilliant ones don't need anybody. She had told herself that so many times it stopped being a hope and hardened into a fact she never bothered to test. The folder said otherwise. It said his father, and there the folder went silent. Just the word withdrawn and then the long blank. And into that blank she poured everything she had never once let herself wonder while she was up in the clouds, closing deals, learning which fork meant power, 22 months. A young man unraveling somewhere out of sight for nearly 2 years, alone, while she stitched her name into the side of a building. She had never asked what leaving had cost him. She had been far too busy making certain it cost her nothing. That was the sentence she couldn't put down. Not the leaving, people leave, the not asking, the decade of not asking. And now there was a yellow house in crayon on her desk, and a name she'd buried, and only one road left that led toward an answer. She drove out to him on a Saturday. The first cover story was an apology. Then she told herself it was to confirm he was all right, that the kids were all right, that the thin folder hadn't been hiding something worse. Then she stopped telling herself anything, because the telling was so obviously a costume, and she was tired down to the marrow of being a woman who required a cover story before she'd let herself feel a single honest thing. The address came from Brenda. The car did not. She drove herself and parked 2 full blocks short of the house, because some animal part of her understood that gliding up to that street in a machine worth a year of its mortgages would be a kind of violence. A way of saying, without words, that she was a visitor from a country these people would never get a visa to. The neighborhood was the kind the listings call up and coming, and the people who live in it call hanging on by the fingernails. Small houses pressed shoulder to shoulder, sidewalks heaved and split by 100 winters of freeze and thaw and freeze. Most front walks lay buried. A few had been shoveled down to bare concrete with the particular stubbornness of people who can't afford much, but can absolutely afford not to let the snow win. His walk had been dug down to bare concrete. Salted, too, a half-empty bag of the cheap ice melt slumped by the steps, the kind you buy when every dollar already has a job and a name. Somebody in this house got up before the sun and made sure no neighbor went down on the ice. Somebody here had turned looking out for strangers into a chore you did before coffee. And the door was yellow, not a tinted yellow, not a beige working up the courage to be a color. A loud, unapologetic, full-throated yellow. The shade a person picks on purpose when they've decided their one small corner of a hard world is going to hold exactly one bright thing in it. And the world's opinion on the matter is not being solicited. She stood across the street under a bare oak and looked at that door a long time. Of course it's yellow, she thought. Of course it is, because in 33 years he was the only person I ever met who'd think to paint a door at all, who'd look at a slab of weathered wood and see a decision worth making. Through the front window, lamplight, gold and low, and in the gold, the shape of a big man down on the floor, not the couch, the floor, down where the children were, which she was learning was its own quiet sermon about a person. She couldn't hear them through the glass. She could only watch the motion, the specific anarchy of kids who have never once had cause to wonder whether they were safe, and so spend the surplus on chaos. A small body launched across the frame, and the big shape caught it without appearing to look. A pillow took flight. A head tipped back into what could only be a laugh. On the wall behind them, even from across a frozen street, she could make out a tidy row of small frames. Not photographs, drawings. Crayon marker, the wax-bright colors of childhood, each one matted in its own plain frame and hung in a careful line at the exact height of a kid's eyes. Someone in that house had decided that what these children made deserved a frame, deserved a wall, deserved to be walked past and noticed every single day. She thought of her own walls, 2 miles and one entire universe away, hung with work selected by a consultant, insured for more than this whole block, that she had genuinely never stopped to look at. Not once, not really. A little girl came to the window, dark hair gone wild from a bath, 5 at the most, a paper crown sliding off over one ear. She flattened both palms and her whole small face against the cold glass and stared out into the dark street, as if she'd heard something out there, or felt it. The way very young children sometimes feel a watcher before they could possibly see one. Catherine drew back into the shadow of the oak. Her heart was misbehaving in a way she had no file for. She, who had outstared regulators and rivals and the imminent collapse of her own first company without a flicker, was hiding behind an oak from a barefoot 5-year-old in a paper crown. And the absurdity of it would have been funny if it hadn't felt so much like grief. Faintly through the closed window and the falling snow, the sound reached her at last. Not words, just the music of words, the up-and-down rhythm of a house with children in it at bedtime, a high giggle, a lower voice answering, patient, endless, a voice with no clock in it at all. The protest creak of an old couch spring, the whole warm machinery of an ordinary evening, she had decided. At 22, she was far too ambitious to ever want. The girl at the window held her vigil a moment longer, then gave it up and turned and ran back toward the gold, toward the floor, toward the man who caught flying children without bothering to look, and Catherine stood in the cold a long, long time. She had wanted, the whole drive out, to name what she felt. Naming was her gift. Name a thing, file it, manage it, move on. But nothing in her would file itself this time. The closest the language came was grief, and even grief sat crooked on it, because you can't properly grieve a thing that is right there, lit up in gold and laughing and catching pillows behind a yellow door. You can only stand outside it in the snow and finally understand, all at once and far too late, the precise dimensions of what you traded away. For a skyline you never look at, for a bed you never share, she tried. That was the part she'd never tell anyone. She actually crossed the street, made it onto the cleared concrete, made it 3 steps up the salted path with her heart going like a fist on a door, rehearsing the unrehearsable, some opening line that wouldn't sound like an apology dressed for a gala, and then a motion light over the porch clicked on. White and sudden and total, pinning her there on the walk like a thief, and somewhere inside a small voice asked a small question, and the whole impossible weight of the next 4 seconds, the knock, the latch, his face, 11 years arriving all at once on a Saturday, crashed down on her, and she turned and walked, fast, back across the street into the dark, furious at herself. A woman who'd signed her name to 9-figure risk, fleeing a porch light like it might bite. She walked the 2 blocks back to the car and sat with the heater running, and her hands nowhere near the wheel, and she did a thing she had not permitted herself to do in front of another living soul, including her own reflection, in 11 years. She let her face go wherever it had been trying to go for a decade. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't a single careful line down a cheekbone. It was a woman alone in an expensive box on a poor street, finally feeling, all the way down, the actual temperature of the life she'd built. When it passed, and it did pass. These things always pass. She'd built a life on the fact that things pass if you just refuse to attend to them. She scrubbed her face with the heel of her hand like a child. She looked once more down the white street at that small gold rectangle, impossibly far away, and somehow the only warm thing for miles, and she made a decision she had no business making and could not, for the life of her, talk herself back out of. She was coming back, and next time she was going to walk up that shoveled path and lift her hand and knock, and let whatever happened on the other side of that door happen to her, all of it. With no exit grammar prepared, she put the car in gear. She circled the block once, twice. A grown woman, a name on a building, circling a yellow door in the falling dark like a moth that had spent 11 years swearing it preferred the cold, and had just this minute remembered, with its whole body, what light was actually for. On the second pass, the yellow door opened. She braked too hard. The car shivered on the ice, and there he was filling the gold rectangle of his own doorway. In socks, no coat, hauling a sack of trash out toward the cans at the curb, the most ordinary act a person can perform. It very nearly stopped her heart. He set the bag down, straightened, and turned his head toward the street. Toward the dark, expensive, ridiculous car idling, where no such car had any business idling, on a block where every soul knew every other soul's vehicle by its engine note. For one suspended second, his eyes went to her windshield, to her. The glass was dark, and the night was darker, and there was no possible way on earth he could see who sat behind the wheel, and still she felt it land on her. That old attention. The total, unhurried, almost surgical quality of it she had once loved and then fled. The sense of being seen all the way down to the framing, to the studs and the wiring, and the thing the whole structure was built to hide. She did not breathe. Then a small, bright voice called out from inside the house, and his entire body turned toward it at once. Helpless, instant, the way a compass doesn't decide to find north. He went back in through the yellow door, and it shut, and the gold rectangle became an ordinary lit window again. She let out the breath she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking on the wheel. Not from the cold this time, because she finally understood the one thing the folder hadn't told her, that he had known her on that road, known her the whole time, flat on his back in the snow, and said nothing, and still, into the wind, said I wish that too, which meant the door had never fully shut. And for the first time in her entire armored life, Catherine Hill was finished driving away. There are people who knock on a door like they're apologizing for existing, and people who knock like they own the wood. Catherine Hill had spent 11 years perfecting the second kind. She stood on the salted concrete on a Tuesday after work, raised her hand to that yellow door, and discovered she'd forgotten how to do either, so she just tapped. Twice, like a coward. Like a woman half hoping no one was home. Someone was home. The door opened to the height of a 7-year-old. A boy looked up at her with the unhurried, total assessment of a kid who has learned early that strangers are a category requiring study. A gap where a front tooth used to be. A child-sized screwdriver held loosely in one hand like a scepter. His chin lifted. You're the lady from the car. She blinked. How do you? Dad said a lady drove into a snowstorm on purpose and didn't even know where her own hood latch was. A grave pause weighing her. He wasn't being mean. He says it like it's interesting. which took her legs out faster than an insult would have. "He told you about me." The boy stepped back, holding the door, an usher of 7. "He tells us the good ones at dinner. I'm Eric. Anna's in the bath because she put a marker up her nose. Emily's mad at me because I said the marker thing in front of you." He frowned toward the stairs. "Sorry, Em." From somewhere above, an aggrieved 9-year-old voice. Eric, then came footsteps. The particular weight of a big man crossing a small house, the creak of one specific board he never bothered to fix because he knew exactly which one it was. And then Thomas was in the hall, a dish towel over his shoulder, sleeves shoved up. The sight of him in real light, not snow-dark and headlights, undid something she'd been holding shut since the road. His face did a complicated thing. Not surprise. Surprise would have been a relief. This was a man bracing a door against weather he'd seen coming for days. His voice was even. "Eric, go check on your sister's nose. It's fine, it came out, it was the washable kind." "Go," the boy went. Thomas looked at her over the dish towel, and the hall got very small. "Miss Hill," the miss landed like a wall, polite. Total. A door of its own, her own voice came out steadier than she felt. "You know my name, your company's on the car registration." He folded the towel off his shoulder, set it on the rail. Careful, the way she was learning, he set everything down, like the world was full of things he refused to let stain. "But yeah, I knew before that, on the road. You knew it was me. The whole time you were lying in the snow fixing my car, you knew. I knew the second you said the engine died and didn't blame anybody for it. You never did blame anybody. 11 years and you still do it. I had your relay half out before I let myself believe it was you, and you said nothing." His jaw worked once, even worse than bitter. "What was I going to say? You needed a mechanic. Not a museum tour of the worst year of my life." Behind him, deeper in the house, water sloshed and a small voice negotiated fiercely with an older one about towels and the precise definition of done. The whole warm racket of a house she had only ever watched through glass. Her throat was tight. "Can I come in?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at her the way he'd looked at the dead car. Like a problem he could probably fix and wasn't sure he should. Then he stepped aside. And the choice he made in stepping aside cost him something she could see. And 11 years walked into the house with her, whether she'd packed them or not. The inside was small and ferociously clean. The clean of a place held together by hand against constant odds. A couch the color of moss with a quilt folded over the arm. 2 armchairs that had clearly started life in 2 different living rooms. A coffee table sanded and repainted so many times its history showed at the corners, like rings in a stump, and the wall of framed drawings, closer now, dozens of them. A child's whole evolving theory of the world in crayon, each one mounted like it hung in a museum that charged admission. "Sit." His voice wasn't unkind. "I'll get coffee." "Fair warning, it's bad. I like bad coffee." "No, you don't." But the line of his mouth shifted. "You like the idea of being a person who likes bad coffee. There's a difference." "Sit anyway." She sat. And the children assembled to inspect the visitor, the way children always do. Anna came first. Marker free now, hair wet, in pajamas with cartoon foxes on them. The girl from the window. Up close, she had a small, wet rattle to her breathing that Catherine's untrained ear filed as nothing, and would learn, far too soon, to fear. The girl planted herself 2 feet away and stared with the frank, unembarrassed curiosity of the very young. "Are you a princess?" "No, you look like one." The mean kind. From the start of the movie, a pause while she revised. Before she gets nice, she climbed onto the couch, not next to Catherine, but close enough that Catherine could feel the small furnace of her, and began, without permission, a very long story about a fox. Emily was harder. Emily came down slow, 9 going on, weary, and did not smile and did not perform. She stood at the foot of the stairs and looked at Catherine the way a sentry looks at a stranger at the gate. The look of a kid who'd learned that adults arrive and adults leave, and the ones who stay are the only ones who count. Her voice was flat. A fact set on the table to see what Catherine would do with it. "You're the one Dad fixed the car for." "I am." "He didn't take the money." "No, he didn't. He never does. People always offer too much and he never takes it. It makes them feel bad. And then they leave." Catherine's chest did something unfamiliar. The kid had diagnosed the entire transaction on the road more accurately, in 2 sentences, than Catherine had managed in 2 sleepless nights. "I'm not going to leave because of the money." She meant it, and watched the girl file the promise away in some internal ledger, to be checked against the evidence later. Thomas came back with 2 mugs. He set the good bad coffee in front of her, and kept the worse one for himself, and sat across the repainted table, forearms on his knees, like a man who'd decided to get a splinter out fast. "You found me. So you went looking." which means somebody with a budget pulled my whole life into a folder and slid it across a desk to you. No accusation in it. Just the flat geometry of how the world was arranged. So I'll save you the suspense. Ask whatever's in the folder. I'd rather you hear it from me than from a column. The question she'd driven out here to ask. What happened after I left? The kids drifted off the way kids do when the air changes. Emily collected Anna with the practiced efficiency of an older sister who'd been collecting Anna her whole life. Herded her and Eric toward the stairs. And then it was just the two of them and 2 mugs, and 11 years on the table. My father got sick, 6 months after your train. Lungs, the kind that doesn't negotiate. He turned the mug a quarter turn, not drinking. There wasn't money for me to be at Brant 200 miles away, and him dying alone in a county with one good doctor, so I picked. It wasn't even a hard pick. People think I gave up the scholarship like it was some tragedy. I gave it up the way you'd drop a bag to catch a kid. You don't agonize. You just open your hand, Thomas. You asked, level, like a man reading a manifest. He went that spring, and then it was just the debt and the quiet, and I found out I was real bad at the quiet. About 2 years of one. I drank. I disappeared on people who'd done nothing to deserve it. The folder calls it a blank. The blank's accurate. I was a blank. How did you come out of it? Something moved across his face. Not pain exactly. The specific ache of a good thing remembered. A guy named Mark. We met at the bottom. Both of us clawing for the same handhold at the same time, which is the only way it ever takes. You can't haul somebody up from dry ground. You have to already be in the water with them. A breath. Mark had 3 kids. Emily was 5. Eric was 3. Anna was a baby who hadn't decided to be a person yet. And their mother, Donna, was already gone. She didn't make it. She went under before Anna could walk, and there's no point being angry at somebody for drowning. So it was Mark and his 3, and for a while it was the 5 of us. First floor I'd felt under me in years. Catherine sat very still. She knew where this had to go. But there's a difference between a line in a file and a man's voice walking you to the edge of it. He died 4 years ago. A bad fall on a job site, an ordinary Thursday. No villain. No story. Just gone. His hands had gone still around the mug, and the kids were headed into the system. There's an aunt on their mother's side, but she was in no shape then. She'll tell you that herself now. So the county was going to place them. And here's what nobody tells you. They try to keep brothers and sisters together, and they almost never can. 3 kids is too many for most homes. They were going to scatter them. Emily one place, Eric another, the baby somewhere else. 3 doors, maybe 3 towns. He said it like a thing he'd folded so many times it no longer cut him, only ached. So I filed. Single guy, mechanic's wage, a record with a 2-year hole in it, asking a judge to hand him 3 kids that weren't his by a drop of blood. Took a year, home visits. A judge who asked me straight out how a man like me thought he was going to raise 3 children alone. The corner of his mouth. I told her the truth. I said I had no idea how. I just knew I wasn't going to let them get split up to find out. Guardianship first. We're finishing the adoption now. Making it the real thing on paper. One more hearing, and then they're mine in the last way that's left, the lamp hummed. Upstairs a board complained under small feet. I didn't save them. He read her face, headed her off before she could turn him into something soft. Everybody wants it to be that. It wasn't. We caught each other on the way down. That's all it ever is. Don't make it a movie. She came back. She told herself it would be once. It was never once. She came on Thursdays at first, because Thursday was the day the shop closed early and she could be there before the kids went down. And then Thursdays weren't enough, and she invented reasons. A book Eric had to have. A thing she'd read about asthma she pretended she'd stumbled on by accident. The reasons were thin, and everyone in the house could see through them, including the 5-year-old. And nobody said so. Which is its own kind of mercy. The coffee became a ritual. She brought the absurd good kind from the lobby of her tower. He made the terrible kind from a dented can, and they drank both, every time. Side by side. A small negotiated treaty. She would not buy her way into his house with better coffee, and he would not pretend hers wasn't better. 2 truths allowed to sit on the same table, the most honest deal she'd brokered in a decade, and not a dollar changed hands. Emily took the longest. Emily was a project of weeks. The girl tested her the way auditors test a balance sheet, looking for the lie that had to be in there somewhere. And Catherine, who had survived actual auditors, found herself caring more about passing a 9-year-old's inspection than any review she'd ever sat for. The breakthrough, when it came, was undramatic. Emily slid a fat notebook across the table one evening, swollen with drawings. You can look, but not the fast way. People look fast and say wow and don't see anything. So Catherine looked the slow way. page by page, for the better part of an hour. And somewhere in the middle she stopped performing patience and was simply, genuinely, studying the work of a kid teaching herself to see. And Emily watched her stop performing, and that was the moment the gate cracked. Catherine held up a drawing of the kitchen, all of them in it, the tall figure drawn taller than the doorframe. "Why's your dad bigger than the house?" Emily looked at her like the answer was load-bearing and obvious. Because if he wasn't, none of the rest of it would stay up. Catherine set the notebook down very gently and did not trust her voice for a moment. Eric was a different weather system. Eric wanted to know how everything worked, and not in the showy way she'd braced for. He didn't perform his cleverness. He just couldn't stop asking. Why does the cold air sit on the floor? If the radiator's hot, why is the window still freezing? Is the moon falling, or is it just always missing? He'd ask, and Thomas would answer him true, never dumbed down, never showing off, and Eric would nod and stack the answer somewhere and ask the next one. Catherine watched a man build a mind on purpose, one honest answer at a time. He's going to be a nightmare at 16. She was watching the boy interrogate his father about why ice floats. He's a nightmare now. Thomas didn't look up from the dish he was drying, but he asks because he actually wants to know, not to win. Most people lose that. School knocks it out of them, or they figure out that knowing things doesn't make you popular. He set the dish down. I'm trying to get him to 15 with it still switched on. After that, it's his to keep or spend. That boy is yours, she thought, whatever the paperwork says. And she had to look at the framed drawings for a while before she could look back at him. And Anna. Anna decided, somewhere around the fourth visit, that Catherine was safe furniture. She announced it not in words but in the most binding language a 5-year-old has. She climbed into Catherine's lap during a movie, uninvited, unhurried, the way small children fold themselves into people they've sorted into the keep pile. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and crayon. She put her thumb near her mouth and her head against Catherine's collarbone, and within 4 minutes she was asleep, a warm, dense weight. Breathing with that small, wet rattle Catherine kept meaning to mention, and kept not mentioning, because mentioning it felt like it might make it true. Catherine sat without moving for 40 minutes. Her arm went numb and stayed numb, and she did not shift it, because shifting it might wake the child, and waking the child had become the most catastrophic outcome she could imagine. More than a failed merger, more than anything on any spreadsheet, and the absurd disproportion of it terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. Across the room, Thomas watched her hold his sleeping daughter. She couldn't read his face. He'd gotten very good, in 11 years, at having a face you couldn't read, and she understood the skill because she'd built the same one. And she understood suddenly that two people who'd each spent a decade learning to be unreadable were a very dangerous thing to put in one warm room. I am in trouble, she thought, with no humor in it at all, the real kind, the kind there's no folder for. She started that month to see things which was itself new. She watched him do the math, the pause before he agreed to any expense, the way his eyes went somewhere private when Eric mentioned a field trip. A science center 2 hours off, $30 a kid, plus the day he'd lose at the shop, which was its own $30. He never said no, he never said yes. He said we'll see how the month shapes up, which she came to recognize as the most honest sentence a careful father owns. She watched him buy the bigger bag because it cost less by the ounce, even when it strained the weak. And she watched the kids never once suspect they were being protected from anything. Because he guarded that not knowing like it was the family silver. Which, she understood, it was. And she watched Anna cough, and the wet rattle, week by week, took on a deeper note, a working sound, as if the child's body had taken on a second job just to move air. She made the offer on a Thursday in the kitchen, and she made it because she couldn't help herself. Because the reflex was older than her good sense. There's a position at my firm. Operations. The physical side, facilities, fleet, the machines nobody upstairs understands until they break. We need someone who can read a failure before it happens. The salary would change your... No, you haven't heard the number, Catherine. The way he said her name. Careful. Like a thing with a sharp edge he didn't want her cut on. I don't need the number. You're the smartest person I've met in a decade, and you're rebuilding carburetors for strangers who tip you in condescension. You walked away from an engineering degree because my father was dying, quiet, immovable, not because of you. Don't do that. Don't turn it into a story where you're the reason I'm a mechanic, so you can be the reason I'm not. That's just you needing to matter to it. And you don't get to matter to it that way. It stopped her cold, because it was exactly surgically true. I'm not a project, Catherine. He set his mug in the sink. I'm not a turnaround. I'm not an underperforming asset you spotted and can optimize back to its potential. I had a potential once. It died in a hospital 200 miles from a school I loved, and I made my peace with that a long time before you drove back into my life. You showing up with a job and a salary. That's not you seeing me. That's you trying to put me back the way I was, so the leaving stops being something you did. Maybe I just want your life to be easier. My life is hard. So's everybody's worth knowing. He leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, the snow ticking the window behind him. You know what easier would actually cost me? I'd owe you. And then the day you got bored or scared or met somebody whose towers taller, and you will, that's not an insult. That's just who you've trained yourself to be. You'd leave the way you leave beautifully, and you'd take the easier with you. And I'd have built my kid's floor out of something that walks out the door. I did that once. Built a future on a person who left on a train. I won't do it to them. The fairest, cruelest, most accurate thing anyone had said to her in years. That's not who I am anymore. It came out smaller than she wanted, maybe. And for a second, the wall came down, and she saw the boy who used to lift her off a kitchen floor. But you don't get to declare that. You have to prove it slow, over a long, boring time, by being here when nothing's on fire. That's the only currency that spends in this house. Not the salary, not the good coffee. Just showing up on the ordinary days, when there's nothing in it for you and nobody clapping, a pause. Money's the thing people reach for when they're too scared to reach for the person. You've been reaching for the money your whole life. She didn't trust herself to answer, so she did the hardest thing she knew. She put the offer down and left it down. She picked up her coat, and at the yellow door he stopped her, not with his hand, with his voice. Come back, but come back as a person, not as a checkbook with a guilty conscience. The kids can tell the difference. So can I. She drove home and did not call her assistant and did not schedule a single thing. And that night, for the first time, she let a feeling sit in her chest. Unfixed, unmanaged, unbought, all the way until morning. It was the most exhausting thing she'd done in years. And somewhere underneath the exhaustion was something that felt, alarmingly, like being alive. She did not yet know that the rattle in a 5-year-old's chest was already counting down to the night that would break all of this wide open. The cough got worse in the second week of February. She noticed because she'd started to notice things, which was itself new. The wet rattle in Anna's chest had a deeper note in it now. A laboring sound. A sound like the child's small body was doing a job it shouldn't have to do, just to move air across a room. Thomas heard it too. She watched him hear it. The specific, terrible vigilance of a parent who has learned to read a small body the way other people read a sky. Counting breaths when he thought no one was looking. Keeping the inhaler on the counter in his eyeline, stopping mid-sentence to track a sound from the next room. Catherine kept her voice low while Anna built a fort out of couch cushions across the room. You should take her in Tuesday. I moved it up, move it up more, Catherine. A warning gentle, a line she was learning not to cross. My kid, my call. I've got eyes on it. She let it go. She was learning where his lines were, and this was the deepest one. My children, my watch, mine, and there was nothing in her bank that could move it. She would think, later, that she should have pushed. She would think it for a long time, but that's the cruelty of the ordinary disaster. It doesn't announce itself. It coughs in the next room, and you tell yourself it's a cold, because the alternative is unbearable, and Tuesday is only 3 days off. The call came Friday at 11:40 at night, from a number she didn't have saved. It was Emily, 9 years old, holding her voice flat and level by an act of will that broke Catherine's heart before she'd parsed a single word. Because she knew that flatness. She'd invented that flatness. It's the sound of a child deciding to be calm because the room requires a calm person, and the only one available is a kid. Anna can't breathe right. Not like a cold. Dad called 911 and went with her, and I've got Eric. But we don't. I found your number on the fridge. I didn't know who else. Catherine was already moving. Coat, keys. The elevator, 40 floors of it, watching the numbers fall. Willing them faster. Where are you? Don't move. I'm coming for you and Eric. And I'm taking you to where your dad is. Which hospital did they say, County? The big one. A small breath. Is she gonna be okay? And Catherine, who had built a career on never promising an outcome she couldn't control, who knew the first rule is that you never swear to a thing outside your power, stood in a falling elevator and broke the rule on purpose. I don't know. I'm not going to lie to you. But your dad is with her. And there is nobody better in a hard room than your dad. So she is not alone. That's the thing that's true right now. You hear me? She is not alone. Now put your shoes on. Both of you, I'm 3 minutes out, she drove herself. White-knuckled, too fast. Eric silent in the passenger seat, his small face turned to the glass. Too silent, the silence scaring her worse than crying would have. Emily in the back, rigid, holding it together by sheer inherited stubbornness. Eric spoke to the windshield, not accusing, just correcting the record, because he was a boy who needed the record accurate even now. You don't know she's okay, no, I don't. But I know your dad's with her, a long pause. The wipers, the dark, okay, and he leaned, just slightly, toward her across the console, the way Anna leaned, and Catherine had to bite down hard to keep her own face in order. The hospital was too bright and too warm, the way they always are. Light that doesn't believe in night. She found Thomas in a molded plastic chair outside the pediatric unit, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on a set of double doors. And he had done the thing she'd watched him do under the car. The thing he did when the stakes went past what a person can afford to feel in the moment. He had made everything inside himself go still and silent and load-bearing. Holding the whole weight alone, so it wouldn't crush the smaller people who depended on him. He looked up, saw the kids, and something broke across his face and got fixed in the same instant. Relief and terror trading places, too fast to name. Eric went to him without a word and folded into his side, and Thomas's arm came around the boy automatically, the way your hand finds a railing in the dark. Emily took his other side, close. A small sentry who would not stand down. Catherine sat across from them. She did not ask questions. She did not offer one single thing. She had finally learned that much. His voice was rough. Emily called you, your number was. She found it on the fridge. I'm sorry if I overstepped, no. He shook his head. No. Thank you. They couldn't be in that house alone, wondering. I had 3 seconds to choose and no good way to choose it. His voice frayed. He pulled it back. Thank you for choosing it for me. The hours did what hospital hours do. Long gray stretches of fluorescent nothing, broken by people in scrubs delivering information in the careful, level, give nothing away voices of people who do this every night, and have learned that hope and despair are both liabilities. A nurse came. Pneumonia, she said, layered on top of an asthma flare that had been building for weeks. Anna's airways had narrowed, and then the infection had moved into what was left, and by the time the ambulance got her, she'd been working too hard, too long, for a body that small. Oxygen, steroids to open the airways, antibiotics. The next few hours mattered. The nurse did not say the word ventilator. She didn't have to. Thomas heard it in the spaces, the way he heard everything, and Catherine watched him hear it, and watched him fold it up and put it somewhere the children couldn't see. Around 1 in the morning, Eric fell asleep against his father's ribs. Thomas didn't move. He sat with a sleeping 7-year-old on one side and a 9-year-old finally drooping on the other, and he held both of them and watched the doors, and did not move. Not when his arm must have gone dead, not when his back must have screamed. Because moving meant waking them, and waking them meant they'd have to feel the hours too. Catherine watched him refuse to move. She had sat through hostile takeovers, and bet the company nights and the slow public collapse of rivals she'd helped along. She had never in her life witnessed anything as plainly, unshowily strong as a frightened, exhausted man holding still in a plastic chair so that 2 children could sleep through the worst night of their lives. She got up once to fetch him coffee from the machine, because it was the only useful thing she could think to do that didn't cost money or take anything from him. She brought it back and set it by his foot, where he could reach it without disturbing the kids. He looked at the cup, then at her, and something passed between them that had no words and didn't need any. His voice was barely above a whisper, over the sleeping heads. You don't have to stay, I know. Then why are you? She thought about it. The honest answer surprised her on the way out. Because there's nowhere on earth I'd rather be than a freezing hospital hallway at 1 in the morning. As long as it's this one. A beat, that's new. I don't know what to do with it, he didn't answer. But after a moment, careful of the sleeping kids, he moved the coffee an inch closer to her foot instead of his. Sharing it. The only thing he had to share at 1 a.m. in a hallway, offered. At 3:20, a doctor came through the doors, and Catherine watched Thomas read the man's walk before the man said a word. Watch his whole body brace around the children. She's turned the corner. The steroids are working. Her oxygen's climbing. She's pulling air on her own and pulling it easier. It was close. A few more hours at home, and we'd be having a very different conversation tonight. But we got ahead of it. She's going to be all right. We'll keep her a few days to be sure. But she's going to be all right, and Catherine watched the weight come off him. Not all at once. In stages, like a building being slowly unshouldered. His eyes shut for 3 full seconds. And the first thing he did, before he asked a single question, before he let himself feel 1 ounce of it, the first thing he did was check that the kids were still asleep, still spared. Then he opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling and breathed, and Catherine looked away, to give him the only privacy a hallway allows. It should have ended there. The corner turned, the child breathing. The long night survived. It would have, if Catherine had been a different woman, or the same woman, a little further along in becoming a different one. But she was who she was, still mostly. And 3 days later, before he had even been handed the number, she had already made it disappear. She did it the way she did everything, quietly, expertly, through a hospital administrator she knew from a board she sat on, under a name that wasn't hers. A 5-year-old's lungs were not going to become a line item that a single father lay awake doing arithmetic over. That was the reasoning. It was good reasoning. It had felt, her entire life, like generosity. It had never once occurred to her to ask the person whether he wanted to be generous at. He found out anyway. Of course he did. He was a man who read the spaces between things. And a 5-figure bill that resolves itself to 0 overnight leaves a very loud space. She replayed the moment for weeks afterward. The instant she'd authorized it, that clean, familiar click of a problem made to vanish. It had felt, for 1 hour, like the old competence coming home. Like she was finally useful to this family, instead of just present in it. She had mistaken being useful for being trusted. They are not the same currency. She would learn the exchange rate the hard way. He called her. The first time he'd ever called her. And she knew from the first syllable that he was not shouting angry, which she could have handled. But the other kind. The quiet kind that lives 1 inch from being hurt. The billing office told me it was taken care of, even, terrible, anonymously. Anna's okay. That's what matters. Don't move it. I'm not going to let you move it. A breath she could hear him steady. I have spent 4 years building one thing, one real thing, out of nothing, that belongs to me and to them. And you walked into the middle of the worst week of it, and decided you knew better than I did what we needed. My daughter's hospital bill was yours to handle. She's not yours, Catherine. I let you hold her while she slept, and you started doing the math on what her lungs cost. I was terrified for her. So was I, flat and final. I was terrified for her, and I was going to pay for it, every dollar, for years, if that's what it took, because that's the job. That's the only thing I own outright. Being the one who carries it, and you reached in and took the one thing that was actually mine to carry, and you carried it for me, behind my back, under a fake name, like I was a problem you could make quietly go away before I noticed I'd been handled. She closed her eyes. I don't know any other language. You said it yourself. I reach for the money because I'm too scared to reach for the person. I was so scared, Thomas. I sat in that hallway and watched you not move for 2 hours, and I have never. I had to do something. And the only thing I know how to do when I'm that scared is write the check. I know. And that was the worst part. That he wasn't even surprised. I've known that about you since you were 22. You don't fix things because you care. You fix things so you don't have to sit in how much you care. And I get it. It's how you survived whatever you survived before I met you. A pause that hollowed her out. But you can't do it to my kids. You don't get to make Anna's worst night into a transaction you settled quietly so you could feel less helpless. Helpless was the right thing to feel. We were all helpless. That's what it is to love somebody you can't fix. You were supposed to just sit in it with us, not buy your way out of it. What do I do? And her voice was not a CEO's voice. It was a girl's in a coat she couldn't afford. Tell me what to do instead. Nothing. That's the part you can't stand. Sometimes the love is just standing there with your hands empty, being no use, staying anyway. You've never once in your life been able to do that. You couldn't do it with us 11 years ago. You got scared of how much it was going to cost you to stay, the real cost, the years, the softness. So you took the train. And just now, when it counted, you did it again. You found the financial exit from a feeling. You always find the exit, a long silence. I'm glad you were there that night. I mean that. The kids needed somebody who wasn't me. And you were it, and I won't forget it. His voice was gentler now, which was the cruelest turn of all. But you can't buy your way back into a place you left, Catherine. There's no number for it. There never was. You taught me that on a road 11 years ago, and you've spent every day since trying to prove yourself wrong. The line went quiet. Not slammed, just set down carefully the way he set everything down. Somewhere it wouldn't stain, and Catherine Hill stood at the glass wall of a penthouse 40 floors above a city she owned a piece of, holding a phone gone dark, and understood that she had finally found the one door in the world that would not open no matter how large she made the offer, and that she had been the one, 11 years ago, who taught it how to stay shut. For 9 days she did not go back, and the not going was the hardest work she had ever done. Harder than any deal, 'cause every cell she owned was built to act, and the only correct move was to hold still and let a man be angry at her in peace. She filled the 9 days with the tower. She closed things. She opened things. She was, by every metric the world used to measure her, magnificent. And she came home each night to 40 floors of silence and understood that she had been confusing motion with life. For so long when she'd forgotten they were different animals. On the 10th day, his lit up her phone at 9:14 in the evening, and she answered before the first ring finished. Too fast, all her hard-won stillness gone in an instant. "I need to ask you something." His voice was wrong, tight in a way she'd heard exactly once, in a hallway at 1 in the morning. "And I hate that I'm asking. I made a list tonight of people I could call. It was short. Your name was on it, and I sat here for an hour hating that before I dialed, I'm here." Her heart was already going. "What happened?" Karen filed a breath. "Donna's sister. The kid's aunt. She's been clean 2 years now. Steady job, married, an apartment with a second bedroom, and she petitioned the court to contest the adoption. She wants them. She's blood and I'm paperwork, and a judge is going to sit in a room and decide which one of those counts for more." The floor of the world tilted. When? Hearings in 3 weeks. And then, lower, the part that gutted her. "And it gets worse, Catherine." Her lawyer pulled Anna's hospital records. They found the payment, the anonymous one, and they're going to stand up in front of a judge and use it. They're going to say a mechanic who can't keep his own lungs working without a secret stranger covering the bill has no business raising 3 kids, and that they'd be better off with blood that has a savings account than with a man who needs charity to keep them breathing. She stopped breathing herself. "The thing I did to help, each word a stone. It's the thing they're going to use to take them. Yeah, flat, exhausted. It is." And Catherine Hill, who had spent 11 years learning there was no problem, money couldn't dissolve, sat down on the floor of her Normsmith's kitchen and understood that her money had just failed to help. It had loaded the gun and handed it to the other side. She did not sleep. She didn't try. She did the thing she was best at instead. Strategy, and the strategy assembled itself almost without her, fast and cold and complete, because this was the one arena where she had never once lost. She knew 6 family lawyers who could bury a recovering aunt's petition under enough paper to suffocate it. She knew people who knew the judge, socially, the way her kind of money always knows the people who matter. She could make 2 years of sobriety look fragile, and a new marriage look like a flag of convenience, and a working woman's motives look like a hand reaching for a wallet. She could win this. Clean. By the end of the month, and somewhere around 4 in the morning, watching the dark go gray over the lake, she finally understood that winning it that way would be the single most loving thing she could do, and also the most destructive. And that those were, for the first time in her life, the same act, because if she won it with money, she proved the other side right. She'd make him exactly what they were accusing him of being. A man whose children were only safe because a rich woman had decided they should be. She'd become the load-bearing wall of his whole household, and a man cannot raise children he keeps only at someone else's pleasure. The keeping has to be his. If I carry it for him, she thought, I leave him with nothing to own. So she did not call the 6 lawyers. She got in the car at 7 the next morning and drove out to the street with the yellow door and sat at his kitchen table with the bad coffee while Emily fed the younger 2 in the next room. And she said the hardest sentence of her professional life. "I'm not going to fix this." He looked at her. Wary, waiting for the catch. "I want to. You have no idea how much. I could end it by Friday and you'd never even see how." She wrapped both hands around the mug to keep them still. "But if I do that, then they're right. Then you really are a man who can't keep his own kids without me standing behind you with a checkbook. And 10 years from now, or 10 months, if you and I aren't, if this doesn't," she made herself say it plainly, "if you and I don't work, then I'm a woman who can take your children's whole world away just by leaving, and nobody should be able to do that to you. I already did it to you once. I am not going to make myself something you can lose." Twice it was, she would think later, the least selfish sentence she had ever spoken, and it had very nearly killed her, because every instinct she'd spent 33 years sharpening was screaming at her to just write the check, win the war, hand him his children gift-wrapped and safe. He was quiet a long moment. "Then what are you offering?" "Because you didn't drive out here at 7 to tell me you're doing nothing. I'm offering you the things that are actually mine to give, and yours to control. There's a family lawyer, Jessica Davis. She does this work for families like yours, the contested ones, the kids who'd get split or shipped. She's better than my 6 because she actually believes in it. I'll introduce you. You hire her on your terms. Not $1 of mine goes near it. She works for you. I never speak to her again after the handshake. And the payment, the thing they're going to wave around in front of the judge, we don't hide from it. We put it in the daylight and let it be the ordinary human thing it actually is. A friend panicked and paid a bill behind your back during the worst week of your life, and you were furious about it, precisely because you're a man who refuses to be carried. That's not a scandal, Thomas. That's how working families survive. Half this country is one fundraiser, one good neighbor, away from a bill they can't cover. The only thing that looks bad is the secret, and the secret was my mistake, not yours. I'll say so under oath if that's what it takes. He studied her a long time, and she watched something shift in his face. The first time it had shifted toward her instead of away. You're really not going to fix it. You're going to stand there and let it stay hard. I'm going to stand there and let it stay hard. Yeah, a breath. I'm told some people can do that. I'm trying to learn how before I'm 40, and for the first time since the hospital, the corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, the memory of one. That's new, I'm working on it. It's slow. I keep wanting to throw money at the slowness. There was a thing he had to do that she couldn't do for him, and they both knew it the second the lawyer said the word. He had to sit down with Karen. They met at a diner halfway between his neighborhood and hers. The kind with vinyl booths and a coffee pot that never stopped circulating. Catherine drove him and then waited in the car, because this was his to carry, and she had finally learned the difference between helping and taking over. But she watched through the window, and she would remember it the rest of her life. Karen was not the villain Catherine had built in the dark. The dark makes villains. It's easier that way. The real woman was small and tired, and somewhere near 40, with the over-careful posture of a person 2 years sober who still counts the days, because the days still need counting. She had her hands wrapped around her coffee the exact way Thomas wrapped his around the bad stuff. And when he slid into the booth across from her, she started crying before either of them had said a word, and Catherine watched a thing she had not braced for. Thomas reaching across the cracked formica and laying his hand over the hand of the woman trying to take his children. Covering it, steadying it. She couldn't hear them through the glass. She didn't need to. She'd learned to read him the way he read engines. It came out later, in the car, in pieces. Karen had been there at the very beginning. She'd held Anna as a newborn. She was Donna's baby sister, and when Donna went under, Karen had wanted the kids and couldn't take them, because she was, in her own words, a disaster who'd have been a 4th child for somebody else to raise. Getting sober had been partly about being able to look at herself again, and somewhere in the long grind of it she'd built a picture. Get well, get the kids, undo the worst year of her own life, hold the only living pieces of a sister she'd lost. She doesn't want to hurt them. Thomas's eyes were on the road, not on Catherine. She wants Donna back, and they're the closest thing the world's still got to Donna. I'd want it too. If I'd been the one who died, and she'd been the one who got well, I'd want somebody like her to step up, a long breath. That's what makes it the worst kind of fight there is. There's no bad guy at this table. There's just 2 people who love the same 3 kids, and one house they can sleep in. Catherine, who had spent a career fighting people she could afford to beat because they were wrong, had no idea what to do with an enemy who wasn't one. What did you tell her? The truth. That they're mine now. Not by blood, by 4 straight years of being the one who shows up. That Emily comes to me when she has a nightmare, not to anybody else on earth. That Eric's whole understanding of how the world holds together got built on a kitchen floor with me. That Anna doesn't remember a single day she wasn't mine, because she was one when it started. He swallowed. And I told her I'd fight her with everything I have. But that no matter what a judge decides, I will never keep her from them. That she's their aunt. That she's got a permanent seat at our table starting today, win or lose. Because those kids don't have too many people who love them. They have exactly enough, and she's one of them. And I'm not going to teach my children that love's a thing you win by taking it away from somebody else. Catherine looked at him. You offered her into the family. While she's trying to take them out of it, yeah, why? Because it's true, like it was the only available move, like it had never been a choice at all. She's their aunt whether the court gives her custody or not. Lying about that to win a case would be teaching my kids that family's a thing you can erase when it's inconvenient. I won't do it, not even to keep them. especially not to keep them, and Catherine sat in the driver's seat of a car worth more than the diner and the block it stood on, and understood that she had spent her whole life optimizing for the win, and was sitting beside a man who optimized for something she didn't have a word for. And that this exact thing, this refusal to win ugly, was what she had been starving for in every glass room she'd ever conquered. The Guardian came to the house the following week. That was how it worked, Jessica Davis had explained. The court appoints a person whose only loyalty is to the children, separate from either adult. She comes, she watches, she talks to the kids alone, and she writes a report the judge leans on harder than anything the lawyers say. Her name was Mrs. Hernandez, and she was kind and unhurried and completely impossible to perform for, which Thomas respected, and which Catherine, who had flown in to be near and then, at Thomas's quiet request, made herself scarce so she wouldn't muddy the picture, found nearly unbearable. Waiting it out in a coffee shop 4 blocks off, the way she'd once waited out a hospital hallway. She heard about it after, in fragments, the way she heard everything now, secondhand, from the outside, learning to live without being the one in the room, how Mrs. Hernandez had asked Anna to draw her family, and Anna had drawn the stick figures, 3 small, 1 enormous, and then, after serious thought, added a smaller figure off to the side with brown hair, and explained that was Aunt Karen. She was new, but she was nice. And then, after even more thought, a 6th figure with yellow hair holding a cup, and said nothing about it at all, just drew it. Because by now it was simply part of the picture, how Eric had explained, with enormous gravity, that a family was like a bridge. You needed the diagonal pieces or the whole thing folded flat, and that Aunt Karen and the coffee lady were diagonal pieces, they made it stronger, and that you do not take pieces out of a bridge to improve it. That was the entire point of a bridge, and could she please write that down? Because adults forgot it constantly. And how Emily, 9 years old, who missed nothing, who tested everyone, had looked Mrs. Hernandez dead in the eye and said the thing that, when Catherine heard it secondhand in a coffee shop 4 blocks away, made her set down her cup and press the back of her hand to her mouth. I already lost 2 parents, my mom and then Mark, and then Dad caught all 3 of us before we hit the ground. I was little, but I remember the catching. So you do whatever the law says you have to do, but I want it written down somewhere official that I know who caught me, in case the grown-ups ever forget. The hearing was on a Wednesday morning, in a courtroom that smelled of floor polish and old paper, and the particular nervous sweat of people whose whole lives are about to be decided by a stranger in a robe. Catherine wore the plainest thing she owned, which was still, she knew, expensive in a way no plain thing should be, and there was nothing she could do about it. So she sat in the back and tried to take up less room than her money did. Thomas wore the one suit he had, bought 4 years ago for the first hearing, a little tight in the shoulders now because 4 years of carrying things had widened him. Karen's lawyer was good. He laid it out clean, no theatrics, because the facts did the cutting for him. A single man, no degree, a mechanic's income, 3 children, a documented stretch of instability in his past. And then, here it was, a sudden anonymous benefactor covering a 5-figure medical bill, suggesting either undisclosed support the court ought to examine, or a household so precarious that strangers had to step in to keep a child alive. He was not cruel. He didn't need to be. Cruelty would have weakened it. Then Jessica Davis stood, and she did not flinch from any of it. She put the payment in the daylight, exactly as Catherine had said. She named it for what it was. A frightened friend doing a clumsy, generous thing against the father's express wishes, and the father furious about it precisely because he was a man who would not be carried. She said the secret looked bad, and the help did not. She said that if needing a hand in a catastrophe disqualified a parent, there would not be a poor parent left with custody of a child anywhere in the country, and the court knew it. And then she called her witness, which was Catherine. Catherine had testified before, to regulators, to a Senate subcommittee once under lights. She had never been afraid of a room in her life. She was afraid of this one, because to do it right, she had to stop being the woman the city knew and become the other one. She had to say, under oath, into a public record any reporter could pull, that she had known Thomas Rodriguez when she was 22, that she had loved him, that she had walked out on him to catch a train to a bigger life, and built an empire on the back of that leaving. She had to admit she'd paid the bill in secret, because money was the only language she'd ever learned to love anyone in, and that he had been right to be furious, and that since the moment he found out, he had refused every cent she'd tried to put toward his life, had insisted on a road where her wealth never once touched his children, had chosen the harder, slower, prouder way at every single turn. Her voice did not shake because she would not let it. In all the years I've spent buying and selling companies, I have met exactly one person who could not be bought. He's sitting right there. The county is worried a rich woman is propping this family up. I'm here to tell you the opposite is true. I have tried with everything I have to make this man's life easier, and he has turned me down every single time. Because the one thing he will not let anyone take from him, not me, not the state, not the aunt who loves these children as much as he does, is the carrying of them. He carries them himself. That is not a weakness in this household. It is the foundation the whole house stands on. You will not find a sturdier one in this building. She stepped down. She did not look at the two reporters in the gallery who'd recognized her name and were already typing. She had just handed the city a story it would gnaw on for a month. The billionaire, the secret old flame, the mechanic, the confession under oath. And she had spent 20 years controlling exactly that kind of story. She let this one go. It was the most expensive thing she had ever given away. And it was the first gift she had ever given that cost her something only she could pay. There was a recess, in the hallway, by a tall window full of gray light. Karen came and stood beside Thomas. Catherine watched from a bench far enough away to leave them the room. She couldn't hear it. But she saw Karen take a folded square of paper from her bag. Anna's drawing. The Guardian must have shared a copy. And she saw Karen look at it a long time, at the three small figures and the enormous one, and the little new figure off to the side, labeled in a 5-year-old's hand, Aunt Karen. And she saw the woman's shoulders drop, the same way Thomas had dropped in a hospital hallway. The weight going out of a fight. When they filed back in, Karen's lawyer rose and informed the court that the petitioner wished to withdraw her petition for custody, and to enter instead, with the respondent's full and prior agreement, a request for a defined and protected role as the children's aunt, regular visits, holidays, a permanent place. The respondent, Jessica noted dryly, had not only agreed but had offered it before any of this began. The judge, who had read Mrs. Hernandez's report, who had read the words "I know who caught me," in case the grown-ups ever forget, looked at the two adults at their separate tables, and said that in 30 years on the bench, she had rarely seen a contested family matter resolve into something that actually served the children instead of the adults, that she would be finalizing the adoption that afternoon, and that she hoped the rest of these children's lives would be conducted with the same uncommon decency. The adoption of Emily, Eric, and Anna was made permanent at 2:40 that afternoon. Thomas Rodriguez became, on paper, in the last way left to become it, what he had been in every other way for 4 years. And in the hallway after, Karen hugged each of the kids, and Anna showed her the gap where a tooth was finally coming loose. And Eric explained bridges at length, and Emily, who missed nothing, watched her father shake the hand of the woman who'd tried to take them, and then invite her to Anna's birthday that Saturday. And Emily turned and found Catherine on her bench by the window, and gave her a small, grave, 9-year-old's nod. It meant, "You came back. I'm keeping count. So far you're holding up." The box came out 3 days later, and it came out by accident, which is the only way the important boxes ever surface. She was hunting for something else entirely, an old lease, a date a lawyer needed. Down in the second closet, the one she never opened, hauling out bankers' boxes she hadn't touched in years, and her hand found a shoebox at the very bottom of a stack, soft at the corners from being carried. 11 years. 4 apartments. A box she'd told every mover was fragile. That one rides with me, and a box she had told herself for over a decade that she had thrown away. She sat down on the closet floor and opened it. The notes were inside, all of them. The radiator's loud, but it won't quit on you. Don't trust the front left burner. Fix the wobble in your chair. It's always the back leg. Write that down for life. Every scrap of paper a young man had left on a counter for a girl he loved, 11 years ago, in an apartment that smelled of burnt coffee. She had not thrown out a single one. She had carried them through every move, told everyone she traveled light, and hidden the heaviest things she owned in a closet she kept locked even from herself. She did not cry the careful way. She cried the way a person cries when something they've been carrying too long finally gets too heavy to keep pretending it isn't there. On the floor, with the closet light on, a woman who had built a tower so she'd never have to sit on a floor again. Sitting on a floor. She put the lid back on, and she did not throw it away. But she made a decision she had been unable to make for 11 years. She was going to give it back. Anna's birthday was that Saturday, and the child wanted exactly 3 things. Purple, a cake that was also purple, and for nobody to sing the slow part of the birthday song, because the waiting made her nervous. Thomas got the purple. Streamers, the cheap crepe kind, hung the night before with Eric on a chair, arguing about whether they were even. A grocery store cake. And then, because Anna had specified also purple, a tub of violet frosting that he and Emily troweled on in a second coat until the thing looked, the two of them agreed, like it had survived something. Which felt about right for this house. Catherine was invited. And that wasn't nothing. There'd been a conversation, a careful one, on the back step a week before, after the hearing, after the dust. Thomas hadn't said let's try. He wasn't a man who announced things. What he'd said, eyes on the dark yard and not on her, was that Anna wanted her there, that she'd made him promise to ask her to her face so he couldn't weasel out of it. And then after a silence, that he didn't know what this was, the two of them, and wasn't ready to know, but that he was done pretending those notes got thrown out. So the door wasn't closed, it was careful. Careful, not closed. And she had managed only, careful's more than I've earned, I'll take careful. So she came to the house with the yellow door in jeans. Actual jeans, which Brenda would not have believed. And she brought a present she had thought very hard about. The old Catherine would have bought the kid a pony, a college fund, a wing of a children's hospital. The new one, the one still learning, had bought a kite, a purple one. Because Anna, stuck inside all that long sick winter, had told her once that the thing she missed most was the park, and the thing she wanted most when she got big was to make something fly. $11. Wrapped badly by Catherine herself, who had never wrapped a gift in her life and refused to let anyone do it for her. The party was loud and small and perfect. 6 kids from Anna's class. Eric running the music off a cracked tablet. Emily supervising the cake with the gravity of a surgeon. Karen came, Aunt Karen, official now, with a card and a hug, and a careful, real nod to Thomas across the room, the nod of 2 people who'd decided to be on the same side for good. Even Mrs. Hernandez stopped in for 10 minutes, off the clock, just to see, and pronounced the stream as excellent. And at some point in the chaos, Anna tore the bad wrapping off the kite and screamed, the good kind, and threw both arms around Catherine's neck. This small girl who 6 weeks earlier had been gray and laboring in a hospital bed, now warm and loud and heavy and furiously alive, hissing into her ear, we have to fly it, we have to, when it's spring, you have to come. And Catherine, who controlled rooms and stories, and the temperature of every space she entered, completely lost control of her own face. Later, when the cake was wrecked and the small guests were sugar-drunk and somebody's mother was collecting somebody, Catherine found Thomas in the kitchen drying his hands, and she set the soft-cornered shoebox on the counter between them. He looked at it. He knew it the way you know your own handwriting, because it was his own handwriting inside. You told me you threw these out. Quiet, not an accusation. A man finding out a true thing 11 years late. I lied. To you, to me. For a really long time, she laid her hand flat on the lid. I'm not giving it to you to keep. The notes are yours, you wrote them. But I wanted you to know I had them. The whole time. Through every move. I told everyone I travel light. She almost laughed. I have never once traveled light. I just hid the heaviest thing I own in a closet and called it gone. Thomas didn't open the box. He put his hand on the lid beside hers, not touching, just near. Keep it, Thomas, keep it. He met her eyes, and the road was in them, the snow, the whole 11 years. You carried it this far. You don't get to set it down the second it gets heavy in front of company, the corner of his mouth. Carrying things is the family business around here. You want in, you carry your own box, and there it was, you want in. Not a door flung wide. A door left careful but not shut. He walked her out to the back step. The snow had stopped, the yard was quiet and white, and the light from the kitchen threw a warm gold rectangle across it. She reached into her coat. Not for a checkbook, she didn't carry one anymore. She'd made herself stop, and drew out a small folded square of cardstock, a paint chip, one color, a warm, stubborn, exact yellow. Marigold, the little label read. The yellow's almost gone, up top on your door. I noticed it the first night, from across the street. I matched it. Took 3 tries. I didn't buy the paint, I didn't hire a guy, I didn't buy the store. I just matched the color. So when you decide to redo it, if you decide, you'll know which one. She held it out. That's the whole gift. A piece of cardboard. You do the rest. He took the chip and looked at it a long time. And she understood, watching his face, that this was the thing she could finally do right. Not the rescue. Not the check that made the problem vanish and the person vanish with it. The small true thing that left him every ounce of the doing. You know what I thought. On the road that first night, his eyes stayed on the dark yard. Flat on my back in the slush, looking up, and of all the cars on all the roads, it was your relay I had my hands in. I told you I didn't recognize you. I lied too. I knew you before you finished saying thank you. And what went through my head, God help me, after everything, was, I wish you were mine. Still. After all of it, her throat closed. Because she remembered. I wish you were mine, he'd breathed into the wind, and she'd said I wish that too, and they had both pretended it was only the cold talking. I thought it too, barely. For 11 years. I just built a skyline tall enough to drown myself out. He nodded slow, and then he said the thing that changed the shape of all of it, that took the old wish, the helpless one, the kind you make flat on your back when the world is happening to you, and turned it into something two grown people could actually stand inside and hold up. Then, here's the deal. No more wishing. Wishing's for people who've decided they don't get a vote. I'm done being a man things happen to. So, not I wish you were mine. How about we just don't get to disappear on each other ever again? That's the whole offer. Nobody owns anybody. We don't vanish. You don't get on the train. I don't go quiet under the car. We stay where the other one can find us. For good. That's a better wish. Her voice was almost gone. It's not a wish at all. That's the entire point. She held out her hand. Not to shake on a deal. She was done with deals, just to hold his hand on a back step. In the cold, like a person who'd finally learned what hands were for. He took it. And up in a dark window, a curtain twitched, and a 9-year-old face vanished, satisfied. Come back. The paint chip was still in his hand. Not for a party. Not for an emergency. Come back when there's nothing wrong at all. That's the real test, you know. Anybody shows up when the house is on fire. The question is who comes by on a regular Thursday, when the only thing happening is cocoa and a kid who built a bridge out of popsicle sticks and swears it holds 11 pounds. She didn't hesitate, Thursday, and that was the whole promise. Not a ring, not a check, not a building with her name burned into the lobby floor. A Thursday, a bridge made of popsicle sticks, a door she now knew the exact color of, that would be open, careful but open. When she came back, she drove home the long way, past a shuttered paint store, and for the first time in 11 years, Catherine Hill, who could buy nearly anything that existed, wanted, more than anything she had ever bought, a thing that had never once been for sale. She wanted to be the one who came back. Not because someone needed rescuing. Just because it was Thursday, and there was a bridge made of popsicle sticks, and 3 kids, and a man with a paint chip in his pocket, behind a yellow door. Not waiting to be saved. Just waiting to see if she'd show. She showed.